Duke of Aldermere had not slept a whole night through in 2 years, and everyone in his household had learned to fear the small hours. Everyone except the new nurse, who simply came and sat and stayed. He had come home from the war whole, which was the cruel joke of it. Other men had come home missing arms and legs and eyes, and the world knew how to pity those men, how to see their wounds and honor them. The Duke of Aldermere had come home with every limb intact, and no mark on him that anyone could see, and so the world had assumed he was fine, and had not understood, could not understand, why the returning hero, the decorated colonel, the man who had done such gallant things in Spain, could not sleep, could not sit at peace, flinched at a dropped dish, went gray at a sudden sound, and passed his nights pacing the halls of Aldermere like a ghost, because the moment he closed his eyes, the things he had seen came for him, vivid as life, and would not let him rest. He did not speak of it. There were no words for it that the world would understand, and he had tried, once or twice, early on, and seen the incomprehension in people's faces. You are home now. You are safe. It is over. Why can you not simply be well? And had stopped trying, and had wrapped the whole of it in a cold, hard silence, and had become, over 2 sleepless years, a grim and solitary and frightening man, because it was easier to let people fear him than to let them see that he was, in the small hours, more frightened than any of them, of the inside of his own head. The household had cycled through nurses and companions and physicians, all of them useless, most of them driven off. The physicians bled him and dosed him with laudanum, which stopped the sleep but not the dreams, and left him worse. The nurses fussed and pitied, and offered brisk, cheerful comforts that made him want to put his fist through a wall. And the Duke had concluded that there was no help for him, that he would pace out the rest of his nights alone until he died of the not sleeping, and had resigned himself to it with the grim fatalism of a man who has stopped expecting rescue. And then his sister, who loved him and would not give up, had engaged one more nurse, a Mrs. Frost, a war widow, quiet, unremarkable, with references from a military hospital, and the Duke had barely troubled to notice her arrival, expecting her to flee within the week like all the rest. She did not flee, and she did not fuss, or pity, or offer brisk comforts. On her first night at Aldermere, when the small hours came and the Duke rose from the bed he could not lie in, and went to pace the cold gallery as he did every night, he found Mrs. Frost already there, sitting quietly in a chair by the dead fireplace, a single candle beside her, a book in her lap, doing nothing at all except being there. "You need not sit up," the Duke said, coldly, expecting to frighten her off. "I do not require nursing. I require to be left alone. Go to bed, Mrs. Frost. I pace at night. It is my habit. It needs no witness." "I know you pace at night," Mrs. Frost said, not rising, not fussing, her voice low and even. "Your sister told me. That is why I am here. I am not going to nurse you, Your Grace. You are quite right that you do not require nursing, and I have no intention of insulting you with brisk comforts or laudanum, or any of the rest of the useless things they have plagued you with. I am simply going to sit here, by the fire, with my book, through the night. You may pace, or not. Speak to me, or not. Ignore me entirely, if you like. I will not trouble you. I will only be here. That is all. Some things, Your Grace, are more bearable with another soul in the room, even a silent one, even a stranger. And I have found, in my time, that the small hours are the worst of all hours to be alone in, and that the whole of what a person in your state sometimes needs is simply not to be the only one awake. So I shall sit. Pay me no mind. Pace your gallery. I am only the woman in the chair, and I ask nothing of you at all." The Duke of Aldermere stared at her, thrown entirely off his stride, because he had braced for fussing or pity or flight, and been met instead with a quiet, stubborn presence that asked nothing and offered only the one thing he had not known he was starving for, company in the dark that did not require him to be well. He did not send her away. He told himself he was too tired to argue, and he paced his gallery, that first night, as he always did. But there was a woman in a chair by the dead fire, quiet, unfussing, turning the pages of her book, and the small hours were, for the first time in 2 years, very slightly less terrible, because he was not the only one awake in the dark. She was there the next night, and the next. She never fussed, she never pitied. She never told him he was safe now, or asked why he could not simply be well, or offered him laudanum or brisk cheer. She simply came, each night, and sat by the dead fire with her candle and her book, and was there. A quiet presence in the worst hours, asking nothing, so that the Duke of Aldermere, pacing his gallery through the small hours, was no longer alone in them. And slowly, over the nights, something in him that had been clenched rigid for 2 years began, in the presence of the quiet, undemanding woman in the chair, very slightly to unclench. The nights taught him things about her, slowly, in the way of two people who share the small hours and nothing else. He learned that she did not sleep well herself, that she came to the gallery not purely as a duty, but because she too found the small hours hard to be alone in, being a widow, and that the arrangement suited them both, two people who could not sleep, keeping each other company in the dark, each pretending it was for the other's sake. He learned that she read poetry, mostly, in the long night hours, and that when he could not bear the silence, but could not bear to speak either, she would, without being asked, begin to read aloud, not to him, exactly, just aloud, into the room, so that the pacing had something to move to besides the drumming of his own thoughts, and he found that a woman's low, steady voice, reading verse into the dark, did more for the horror in his head than all the laudanum the physicians had poured into him. He learned that she never startled when he flinched, never exclaimed, never made him feel that his broken responses were a spectacle, that when a log cracked in a distant grate and he went rigid and gray, she simply went on reading, calmly, as though nothing had happened, giving him the dignity of not being watched in his affliction. And it was that, the dignity, more than anything, that began to make him trust her. There was one night, early on, before he had ever truly spoken to her, when the dreams had been very bad. He had not slept at all, and by 3 in the morning, he was pacing the gallery in a state near to breaking, his hands shaking, the ditch very close, and he had stopped at the dark window and stood there rigid, fighting it, and had heard, behind him, Anne set down her book and say, quietly, not moving from her chair, "Breathe, Your Grace. Just breathe. Whatever you are seeing, it is not in this room. In this room there is only a cold gallery, and a candle, and a tiresome woman reading Cowper, and the dark outside the window, and nothing that can hurt you. Come back to the room. Name me something you can see. Anything. Out loud. Name me one thing in this room that is real, and here and now." And the Duke, gripping the windowsill, had managed, roughly. The candle. Good. Another. Your book. On your lap. The blue cover. Good. Another. The frost. On the window, in the corners of the panes. Good, Anne said. You see? You are here, in the gallery, with the candle, and the blue book, and the frost on the glass. Not there, here. The there cannot follow you into the here, if you keep naming the here out loud. It is a trick I learned in the hospital. The mind cannot be in the ditch and in the room at once, if you make it name the room. Keep naming, Your Grace, whenever it comes for you. The candle, the book, the frost. Pull yourself back into the room, one real thing at a time, and know that the woman in the chair will go on naming them with you, all night if need be, for as many nights as it takes, until the room grows stronger than the ditch. And she had picked up her book and resumed reading, calmly, giving him the dignity of privacy again. And the Duke had stood at the window, naming real things under his breath, the candle, the book, the frost, and had felt the horror slowly loosen its grip, pulled back into the present by a widow's quiet trick and a widow's quiet voice, and had understood that this woman knew something about his affliction that no physician had ever known, that it could not be cured, but it could be companioned, and that a companion who knew the ditch from the inside was worth more than every doctor in England. He had thanked her, awkwardly, near dawn, and Anne had said only, "You need not thank me. I have stood at that window myself, in my own way, after my husband. I am not helping you from above, Your Grace. I am reaching across, from one ditch to another. It is a different thing, and a better one, I think. Help from someone who has been where you are. Now try to sleep an hour before it is light. I will be here. I am always here. And she had been, and slowly, night by night, the room had grown stronger than the ditch, exactly as she had promised. And the Duke of Aldermere had begun, without quite noticing when it started, to live for the sight of the candle in the gallery and the woman in the chair, which is to say, though he did not yet know the word for it, to love her. It was 3 weeks before he spoke to her, really spoke, and when he did it was because she had never once demanded that he should. That was the thing that made it possible, the not demanding. Every other soul who had tried to help him had wanted something from him, wanted him to explain, to improve, to be grateful, to get better on a schedule that would let them feel they had succeeded. And their wanting had made it impossible, because a man cannot open a wound that deep to someone who is standing there waiting to be thanked for it. Mrs. Frost wanted nothing. She sat by the dead fire night after night, asking not a single thing of him, and it was precisely because she asked nothing that, on the 21st night, the Duke of Aldermere found that he could, at last, begin to speak. He did not plan it. He was pacing, as always, and the words simply came, quietly, into the dark, to the woman in the chair who was not looking at him, which made it easier. There was a boy, he said, at Badajoz, one of my own men, barely a man, 17, a farmer's son from my own estate. I had known his family my whole life. His mother had asked me, when we marched, to look after him, and I could not. In the storming of the breach it was chaos, and fire, and I lost him. I do not even know how. One moment he was beside me, and the next he was gone, and I found him after, in the ditch, among the, and I had promised his mother. I had promised her I would look after him. And I came home, and she was waiting at the gates when I rode in, and she looked at my face and she knew, and she has never once reproached me, which is worse than if she had. And I see him every night, Mrs. Frost, every single night, in the ditch, 17 years old. And I cannot, there is no bearing it, and there is no ending it, and there is no one I can say it to, because everyone says the same thing, that it was war, that it was not my fault, that I must let it go, and none of them understand that it does not matter whose fault it was, that the boy is dead in a ditch either way, and I promised his mother, and I close my eyes, and he is there. That is why I do not sleep, not because I am afraid, because sleep is where he is, and I cannot go to where he is, night after night, and survive it. Mrs. Frost was quiet for a long moment, and then she said the thing that no physician and no brisk nurse and no well-meaning friend had ever said, the thing that reached him because it did not try to fix him. I am not going to tell you it was not your fault, she said. You have heard that 100 times and it has not helped, because it is not the point. You know, in your reason, that a colonel cannot save every man in the storming of a breach, that the chaos took him and not your failure. You know that, and it does not touch the grief, because grief is not an argument to be won. So I will not argue with you. I will only tell you that I know that ditch, Your Grace, not the boy, but the ditch, the place you go every night that no one else will follow you to. My husband died in Spain, and I nursed at the military hospital for 3 years after, and I have sat with 100 men in the small hours who could not sleep for the same reason you cannot, who saw the same ditches with different faces in them, and I learned, sitting with them, the one true thing I have to offer you, which is this: it does not end. I will not lie to you and say it ends. The boy will be in the ditch for the rest of your life. That is the price of having loved him and lost him and promised his mother. It does not heal over and vanish, but it becomes bearable, not by forgetting, not by being argued out of it, but by not being carried alone. That is the whole secret, Your Grace, and it is not much of one, and it is the only thing that ever worked in 3 years of the hospital. The men who broke entirely were the ones who bore it alone, in silence, in the dark, convinced no one could understand. And the men who came through, not healed but through, able to live, were the ones who found one person who would sit with them in the ditch, not pull them out of it. No one can pull you out. but climb down into it beside you, and look at what you are looking at, and say, "Yes, I see him too, and it is unbearable, and you are not alone down here. That is what I am for, Your Grace. I cannot cure you. No one can. But I can sit with you in the ditch, so that you are not there alone. And being not alone in the unbearable place is the difference. I have seen it 100 times, between a man who is destroyed by what he carries, and a man who learns, slowly, to carry it. You have been alone in the ditch for 2 years. You need not be, any longer. That is why I came, and why I stay, and why I ask nothing, because the thing you need is not a nurse or a cure. It is a companion in the dark, and I am very good at that. I have had a great deal of practice." And the Duke of Aldermere stopped pacing, and stood very still in the dark gallery, and wept. The first time he had wept in 2 years, the rigid, clenched grief of 2 silent years breaking at last, because someone had finally offered not to fix him, but to sit with him, to climb down into the ditch beside him, and say, "I see him too. You are not alone down here." And Mrs. Frost did not rise, and did not fuss, and did not go to him, but stayed in her chair by the dead fire, a steady presence, and let him weep, and said only, quietly, when the worst of it had passed, "There, you are not alone in it now. That is all I can give you. But it is, I have found, a great deal more than it sounds." He began to sleep after that, not all at once, and not every night, but the speaking had let something drain that had been poisoning him, and the not being alone had made the nights bearable, and slowly, over the weeks that followed, the Duke of Aldermere began to sleep again. An hour here, then 2, then 1 miraculous night until dawn, because Mrs. Frost had given him the one thing that helped, which was her steady, undemanding company in the dark, and the permission to grieve without being fixed, and the knowledge that the ditch, though it would never close, need not be faced alone. And in the giving and the receiving of it, over the long nights by the dead fire, the 2 of them, the war-broken Duke and the war-widowed nurse, who understood his ditch because she had sat in 100 like it, fell, quietly, and without either of them quite noticing the moment, in love. She told him her own story, in time, on one of the nights when it was he who sat with her, for the small hours came for Anne too, in their way, and the Duke had learned, watching her, to give back the thing she had given him, the quiet, undemanding presence, the company in the dark. She had married young, she told him, a lieutenant, a good, kind, laughing man, no fortune, but she had not wanted fortune, and she had followed the drum with him, as some wives did, through the campaigns in Spain, living rough in the baggage train, and she had been happy, absurdly happy, in the hard, wandering soldier's life, because she had loved him and been loved. And then, at one of the battles whose names the newspapers made glorious and the wives learned to dread, he had been killed. Not gloriously, she said. There is nothing glorious about it up close. Only a man she loved carried back to her on a door. And Anne had been widowed at 23, alone, in a foreign country, with no fortune and no way home. "I could have gone under," she said, staring into the dead fire. "A great many soldiers' widows did, went under entirely, into grief or worse, alone in Spain with nothing, and I nearly did. And the thing that saved me was the hospital, the military hospital, where I went first out of desperation, needing employment, and stayed out of something better. Because there, among the wounded and the dying and the men broken in spirit as you are broken, I found the one thing that could reach my own grief, which was usefulness. A way to pour the love I had nowhere left to give into the men who needed it, and in the giving, to bear my own loss. I sat with dying men, and with men who could not sleep for what they had seen, and I discovered I had a gift for it, the sitting with, the not fixing, the climbing down into the ditch, and I discovered, too, that it healed me even as I did it, because a grief that is poured out in service to others is a grief that is being carried, rather than merely suffered. I was in a ditch of my own, Alaric, when I came to that hospital, and I climbed out of it, slowly, by climbing down into 100 others' ditches and refusing to leave them alone. That is where I learned everything I know, That is why I do not fear your dark. I have lived in my own, and found the only way out of it, which is not out at all but through, and through with others, never alone." And the Duke of Aldermere, listening to the widow's story in the small hours, understood at last why Mrs. Frost had been able to reach him when all the physicians had failed. Because she was not a well person condescending to a broken one, not a nurse applying a technique, but a fellow sufferer who had been to the bottom of the same dark and found the same hard, narrow path through it, and was reaching back to him across it, one wounded soul to another. And he understood, too, the thing that made his growing love for her different from gratitude, and better, that he did not merely need her, he wanted to be for her what she had been for him, to sit in her ditch as she had sat in his, to give back the company in the dark, to be, for the widow who had spent her life carrying others, the one person who would help her carry her own grief for once. "You have spent your whole life sitting in other people's ditches," he said. "The soldiers, me. Who has ever sat in yours, Anne? Who has ever carried you, while you were busy carrying everyone else?" And Anne Frost was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, in a voice not quite steady, "No one. Not since my husband. That is, I had not thought of it that way, but no one. I am the one who sits with others. It has not occurred to anyone, in a long time, that I might need sitting with myself. It has occurred to me," said the Duke of Aldermere, "and I am not going anywhere. You sat in my ditch for months, asking nothing. It is my turn to learn to sit in yours. That is a thing I find I want very much, to be the one who carries you, for once, as you have carried so many. Let me. You need not always be the strong one, Anne. Not with me. With me you may, sometimes, be the one in the chair who needs the company." And Anne Frost, who had spent years being everyone's companion in the dark and no one's, put her face in her hands, there by the dead fire, and let the Duke of Aldermere sit with her in her own grief, for the first time in years. And it was, for both of them, the moment the thing between them stopped being nurse and patient, and became, plainly and mutually, two wounded people who had chosen to carry each other, which is to say, love. He fought it, of course, when he understood it, because the Duke of Aldermere had decided, in the long grim years, that a man as broken as he was had no business asking any woman to bind her life to his. "I cannot ask you to stay," he told her one night, when the thing between them had grown too large to leave unspoken, and he had steeled himself to send it away for her sake. "I know what I am, Mrs. Frost. I am a man who wakes in the night with his heart pounding, who cannot bear a sudden noise, who will carry a dead boy in a ditch to his grave, and be poor company in the small hours for the rest of his life. You have made it bearable. God knows you have. You have given me back sleep and something like peace, but I will not pretend to you that I am cured, because you, above all people, know that I am not, that this does not cure, that you would be binding yourself to a man who will wake you at 3 a.m. for the next 40 years. And I will not do that to you. You have already given so much. You have sat in my ditch for months, asking nothing, and I will not repay it by asking you to sit in it for the rest of your life. You deserve a whole man, an easy man, a man who can give you peaceful nights, not me. So I am going to say the thing I have been dreading, which is that when I am well enough, when I can manage the nights alone, you should go, and find a life that is not spent nursing a broken soldier through the dark, because that is no life for you, and I care for you far too much to ask it." And Mrs. Frost, Anne, her name was Anne, though he had only lately let himself think it, looked at him with the steady, clear gaze that had held him through so many nights, and answered him with the hard-won wisdom of a woman who had loved and lost and sat in 100 ditches. "You are doing the noble fool thing," she said, "that wounded men always do, deciding, for the woman, that she is too good to be burdened with you, and calling it kindness when it is really only your own conviction that you are not worth loving, dressed up as concern for me. So let me answer it plainly, because you have earned plainness. First, you say I deserve a whole man, an easy man, a man who can give me peaceful nights. Your Grace, I do not want a whole easy man. I had one. My husband was as whole and easy and untroubled a man as ever lived, a good, kind, ordinary man, and I loved him, and he died, and I grieved him. But I will tell you a truth I have never told anyone. I have never in my life felt as needed, as useful, as holy and deeply connected to another soul as I have felt sitting in the dark with you these months. An easy man does not need what I have to give. You do, and being needed for the deepest thing I have, my ability to sit with a person in the unbearable place, is not a burden to me, Alaric. It is the thing that gives my life meaning. You think you would be asking me to sacrifice myself to nurse a broken man. You would be asking me to spend my life doing the one thing I am best at in all the world, for a man I love. Those are not the same, and only your own low opinion of yourself makes you unable to tell the difference. And second, she went on more gently, you say you are not cured, that you will wake me at 3 in the morning for 40 years. Perhaps you will. I have thought about that, more carefully than you have, because I know exactly what it means, having done it in the hospital. I am not romanticizing it. I know the reality of the nights, the years of them. And I am telling you, with my eyes fully open, that I would rather be woken at 3 in the morning for 40 years, by a man I love, and get up, and light the candle, and sit with him in the ditch until the dawn, than sleep peacefully every night of my life, beside a man who does not need me, and whom I do not love. That is not sacrifice. That is the life I want. A life that matters, spent with someone who needs exactly what I have, whom I love, and who loves me. You are not a burden I am too kind to refuse. You are the life I am choosing, freely, with a full and clear understanding of every hard night it will contain, because the hard nights with you are worth more to me than easy nights with anyone else. So stop deciding for me that I am too good for you. Let me decide. I have decided. I want the ditch, and the 3 in the mornings, and the whole broken beloved rest of you, for the rest of my life. The only question is whether you are brave enough to let me have what I want, which is you. The Duke of Aldermere looked at the woman who had sat in his ditch for months, and was now telling him, clear-eyed, that she wanted to sit in it for life, and understood that she meant it, that this was not pity, or duty, or a nurse's kindness, but a free, clear choice, made with full knowledge of the cost, and that his noble refusal had been, exactly as she said, only his own conviction of his unworthiness, wearing the mask of concern for her. I do not know how to be loved, he said, low. Not anymore. The war took it out of me, the trusting, the letting anyone close. I have been alone in the dark so long, I am not sure I remember how to be anything else. I know, Anne said. That is all right. You do not have to know how. You only have to let me stay in the room. That is the whole of it. And it is the thing you have already been doing for months, letting me stay in the room. And look how far it has brought you. You sleep now, sometimes till dawn. You have wept, and spoken the boy's name aloud, and begun to carry him, instead of being crushed by him. All of that came from the one thing, letting me stay in the room. Marriage is only letting me stay in the room forever. You need not learn anything new. You need only not send me away. Can you do that? Can you let me stay? And the Duke of Aldermere, who had been alone in the dark for 2 years, and had learned, from a quiet war widow in a chair by a dead fire, that the unbearable becomes bearable when it is not borne alone, did the bravest thing left to him, which was to stop being noble and let himself be loved. Stay, he said. God help me, Anne. Stay. Not as my nurse, as my wife. I love you, and I do not deserve you, and you have just told me that deserving is not the point, that the point is only whether I am brave enough to let you have what you want, and I find I am not brave enough to refuse you anything, least of all this. Marry me. Sit in my ditch for the rest of our lives. Wake to my 3 in the mornings and light the candle and stay. I cannot promise you easy nights. I can only promise you that no man alive will ever be more grateful for your company in the dark, or love you more for choosing the hard thing with your eyes open. Stay, Anne. Marry me. Let me not be alone in the dark ever again, and let me spend my life making the dark, when it comes for you, for it comes for everyone, in time, less lonely than mine has been. Will you? Yes, said Anne Frost, and rose, at last, from the chair by the dead fire, and crossed to him in the dark gallery. Yes, of course yes. I have been yours since about the third night, when you did not send me away. Yes." And the Duke of Aldermere took the war widow into his arms in the gallery where he had paced alone for 2 years, and the dark, which had been so terrible and so solitary, became, from that night, a place where 2 people kept each other company, and it was not cured, and the boy was still in the ditch, and there were still, for years, the 3 in the mornings, and the sudden flinches, and the nights the past came for him, but he was never alone in them again, and that, exactly as Anne had promised, made all the difference between a man destroyed by what he carried, and a man who learned, with a companion beside him, to carry it and live. They were married quietly, and the marriage was, in its particular way, one of the deepest anyone who knew them had seen, deep with the particular closeness of 2 people who had met in the dark, in the unbearable place, and chosen each other there. The Duke of Aldermere did not become, magically, a well man. That is not how such wounds work, and this is an honest tale. But he became, under Anne's steady companionship, a man who could live, who slept most nights, and flinched less, and carried the boy from the ditch, not as a crushing secret, but as an honored grief he had spoken aloud, and no longer bore alone. He went, in time, to see the boy's mother, the farmer's widow at the estate's edge whom he had avoided for 2 years in an agony of guilt, and Anne went with him, and he sat in the woman's cottage and wept with her, and spoke at last of her son, and the 2 of them, the colonel and the mother, grieved the boy together, and it was, the Duke said afterward, the beginning of the true healing, the thing he could never have done without Anne beside him, to make the unbearable bearable. He endowed, in the boy's name, a home for old and broken soldiers, the men the world did not know how to pity, the ones whole in body and shattered in spirit. And he and Anne ran it together, and it became the great work of their life, a place where such men could find the one thing that had saved the Duke, which was not a cure, but a companion, not a fixing, but a sitting with, someone to climb down into the ditch beside them, and say, "I see it too, you are not alone down here." "You never tried to cure me," the Duke said to his wife, years on, watching the broken soldiers of their home sit in the garden in the sun, each with a companion beside him. "Everyone else tried to cure me, and it made me worse, because it told me I was broken and ought to be fixed, and was failing to be. And you never once tried. You only sat with me. You climbed down into the ditch and stayed, and it turned out that was the only thing that ever helped, not being fixed, but being accompanied. How did you know, when every physician in England did not?" "Because I had been in the ditch myself," Anne said simply, "when my husband died, and I know what helped and what did not. No one can be cured of grief, Alaric, or of what the war does to a soul. Those are not illnesses to be cured. They are wounds to be carried. And a wound is not made bearable by someone standing over you telling you to heal. It is made bearable by someone sitting down in it beside you and refusing to leave. That is all I ever did. It is all anyone can do, for the wounds that do not heal. And it is enough. It is more than enough. It is very nearly everything. You were alone in the dark, and I sat down in it with you, and stayed. That is the whole of our story. It is not a story of a woman who cured a broken man. It is a story of 2 wounded people who found they could carry their wounds together, in the dark, and were less alone for it. Which is, I have come to believe, the truest thing love is, under all the rest, not the fixing of each other, but the refusing to leave each other alone in the unbearable places. You have been my companion in the dark for 20 years. I have been yours. Neither of us is cured. Both of us are carried. That is enough. That has always been enough." And the Duke of Aldermere took his wife's hand, in the sunlit garden full of soldiers who were learning, each of them, that they need not be alone in the dark, and thought that he had come home from the war whole in body and shattered in spirit, and been given up as beyond help, and had been saved, in the end, not by any cure, but by a quiet woman who sat down in a chair by a dead fire and refused to leave the room, and that there was no medicine in the world worth a fraction of that, the simple, unbearable, lightning miracle of not being alone in the dark.